Hey guys, I'm Dr. Bob, and in this video I'm going to show you my process for making games. Let's take a look. Alright, let's show them how to make a game. Let's make a game about space pirates. Yeah, space pirates, the game. Awesome. So, well, I have a map. Let's put some planets on it. So three planets, that'll do. And, well, the pirates are gonna have to move from planet to planet, so let's grab some dice, like this guy. Yeah, nice chunky D10. You know what? That might be a little bit too adventurous. Like, let's stick with the classics. Let's get two D6s. That's really how you move around in a game, right? Wait a minute. What am I even moving around? I need ships. I need pawns. Like, yeah, let's bring these guys and some space police and some space pirates and but pawns are so boring though. Like, no. We are getting miniatures. Yeah, we're gonna make the coolest space pirate game ever, and it's gonna be so dang it. I think I'm kind of missing the point here though. Like, what are we pirating? What are we looting? We need an economy. So we need chits, we need discs, we need resource cubes. We're gonna make the best space pirate game ever.
Approximately 10 hours later.
These f***ing space pirates. There has gotta be a better way to do this.
Does this sound familiar? If so, then you are likely one of millions of game designers struggling from game designer's block, mechanical indecisiveness, or poorly installed drywall. Thankfully, there is a solution. Sign up now and you can learn all about
Okay, this is getting a little bit too cringy, but there is a good point to all of this. You see, it can be quite challenging to make an original game if you don't first get your priorities straight. And by not doing that, you might find yourself second guessing your mechanics and other elements of your game quite a bit. Now, thankfully, there's a good solution for this, and today's video will teach you all about that. So hang on tight, and let's talk about MDA and player motivation. So in that silly intro opening skit that you saw, I made a mistake that's actually quite common amongst my own game design students. You see, I was prioritizing the mechanics of my game instead of thinking about the experience that I want my players to have. Sure, I knew I wanted to make something about space pirates, but a game about space pirates, well, it could take on so many different shapes and forms that it led to what I would call game designer's block, a condition similar to writer's block. Now don't get me wrong there though, like there's nothing inherently problematic about thinking about your game mechanics as you start a new design. In fact, game designer Jesse Schell talks about how the elemental tetrad offers 4 equally important entry points into game design. You could start with what your game looks, sounds, smells, even tastes like, which Jesse refers to as the aesthetics. You could start with the story or the narrative aspects of your game. You could start with a cool technology, like say something new like VR or AR. And finally, you can start with defining the mechanics of your game. Now, all 4 of these are equally valid and good entry points into game design. For example, a game like Beat Saber, well, that's clearly built around the affordances of VR technology, while a game like Gone Home really dials into a strong narrative. However, regardless of whatever entry point you choose, great games typically carve a path across all the areas of the tetrad. For example, take Half-Life Alyx. This is a game that's clearly built with VR in mind from the beginning, but it's also a very strong narrative. It has truly interesting game mechanics, and it is a very powerful sensory aesthetical experience. Now, my favorite way to traverse the elemental tetrad, if you will, is through a formal design technique, which is called MDA. So MDA has been around for a few years, and it has become a staple in the video game industry. In fact, it's been around so long that I have been using it in class for years and years, and I've even done a video on the topic already. So instead of me shooting a new video for it, I figured like, hey, let's have a look and see how ridiculous that video was back then. So here we go. Oh, Hi Internet, I'm Bob de Schutter. I'm a game designer and a professor of game design. And in this video, I'm going to teach you how to make games that people will absolutely love to play. So let me set the stage for you here. Alright, so first off, let's give credit where credit is due. MDA is not something I came up with. It's an approach to game design that was originally written up in 2004 by Robin Hunicke, Mark LeBlanc, and Robert Zubek. Now these three people decided to start analyzing games through the lens of three distinct layers: the mechanics, the dynamics, and the aesthetics. Now let's take a quick look at each, and to do so I am literally going to use the first game I found in my partner's apartment as an example. I guess Battleship will have to do. However, as I do so, please remember that MDA works with every game or every game design that you can think of. So let's talk mechanics first. Mechanics are the rules and the components of the game. And in the case of Battleship, it's all the plastic you see in front of you here. It's the case, it's the little battleships, it's the water boards, it's the pegs, it's the other pegs, and the rules, of course. And in case you've never seen the rules of Battleship before, here they are. So mechanics are actually pretty static, but once you start playing a game, all of that changes. The game rules and the player decisions start to interact with each other, and the game becomes more than the sum of its parts. It becomes a dynamic system. And that's what we mean when we talk about the dynamics of a game. Now for Battleship, this system will result in you not clustering your ships together, because then they become too easy to shoot for your opponent. You might optimize your firing patterns, trying to find your opponent's ships more effectively. Or maybe you try to read your opponent's facial expressions, hoping to find a tell. And that brings us to the final part of MDA, because thanks to the dynamic system, we as players experience strong emotional responses while we're playing. Games can make us feel challenged, surprised, connected, scared, sad, epic. And those powerful emotions is what will make people fall in love with the games you design for them. Now, so far we've mostly covered analysis. You now have a new vocabulary that you can use to analyze games with: mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics. However, to design games, we still need to cover a couple more things. So, how do you design with MDA? Well, the trick is to use it backwards. So say this is you, the game designer, and this is your future player. When you go about designing a game, you want to apply MDA backwards, so that means starting with the aesthetics. Now, what kind of aesthetics, what kind of emotional responses will your player like when playing your game? If you're not sure about that, have a look at this list for inspiration. There are literally hundreds of emotions that a game can create for your players, so you just have to pick some and decide which ones your game will create. Next, think about what kind of dynamics, what kind of system you will need to accomplish those emotional responses. Say you want a game that feels dramatic, then how is your game's dynamic system going to make your players feel that drama? Maybe the system always ends in the heroes winning in the nick of time, or maybe the system results in many conflicts between important characters. In any case, it's up to you to decide what the dynamics of your game will be like, and once you figured that out, you can turn that hypothetical system into little packs, components, rules, maybe even a video game, who knows? In any case, this is what MDA is all about. It's about thinking about the emotional response you want to elicit in your players, and then creating a game that actually leads to those emotional responses. And you might not get it right the first time. When you test your game for the first time, you'll probably learn that you failed miserably and that your players are not really feeling those desired aesthetic outcomes. And you know what? That's actually fine. In game design, you want to fail fast and you want to fail often. Because the quicker you can get those failures, the quicker you will get to the successes. And you can turn something like this into something that feels like this. Fire! Thanks for watching and have a lot of fun with MDA. Bye. So there you have it. That is MDA in a nutshell. It is about defining your emotional outcome, thinking about what interaction between the game and the player that will lead to an experience that will lead to that outcome, and then defining mechanics that allow for that interaction and experience to take place. So now you have a process that can help you navigate the elemental tetrad and help you avoid mechanical indecision and game designer's block. Just think back about that Space Pirates game that I talked about earlier, right? With MDA, you will have to think first about the emotional experience you want your players to have. The aesthetics really are what you want your game to result in, right? So maybe that Space Pirate game is about feeling like an outlaw that always narrowly escapes the law. So yeah, that's awesome. So what about dynamics that would provide that? Maybe it's a game about players racing to get their spaceships across the galaxy with perhaps a rubber banding system that ensures that the space police is always right behind you. So if that is what you really want, you can start thinking about your components and the rules that you need to make that exciting space race happen. However, maybe, just maybe as you hear me talk about this, you feel that those dynamics, well, they're not space piracy enough. Like, maybe that's not what space piracy should be about. Maybe it should be about outracing space police. Maybe it should be about outsmarting space customs. Wonderful. So now you're probably thinking about a game system in which you have to hide various goods the clever ways, which is an entirely different game that will have entirely different mechanics, but thanks to MDA, you are now achieving an extremely important outcome. You just got yourself a design vocabulary. A design vocabulary that allows you to make decisions in function of your player, and everyone on your team can share that vocabulary as you make those decisions. And that is just so powerful. I mean, everybody can get on the same page now. Anyways, if you're watching this as part of my class, we will do some exercises to train your MDA skills. But before we get to that though, I want to talk a little bit about aesthetics. Because the authors of MDA provided 8 kinds of fun as a non-exhaustive list of game aesthetics that you can use for your own games. They are sensation. So sensation refers to games that have aesthetics that result in strong sensory experiences. Thrilling horror games with jump scares like Layers of Fear provide that. But it could just as well be a Twitch speed MOBA such as League of Legends, or a really beautiful game world such as Assassin's Creed. If a game really puts you on the edge of your seat or have you feel all the feels, you know this is a game with a strong sensation aesthetic. Then there's fantasy. Fantasy allows you to enter a world of make-believe. For instance, games that let you role play, such as Divinity Original Sin 2, but basically any RPG or simulation game such as Job Simulator fits that description. Then there is narrative. Narrative can be extremely powerful when players get invested in a story and they want to see how it unfolds. And it's a very strong emotional outcome. Take, for example, games like Gone Home again. Those are games that will keep you anticipating the final outcome of a compelling story. So, powerful aesthetic as well. Then there's challenge. So challenge is a big one. Challenge refers to the obstacles that games present. And well, when talking video games, almost every game has some sort of a challenge. Sure, there are some on-rails narrative experiences with very little challenge. But when people think of games, they often think about obstacles. From Pong to Apex Legends, challenge is a very popular aesthetics that, when it's implemented well, will keep your players come back for more. Then there's fellowship. Fellowship means playing games together, and that can be extremely meaningful, and it's a very powerful aesthetic to design games around. Take, for instance, Sky Children of Light. It shows you how strong fellowship can be, as in that game you don't even need to hear, see, or speak with the person behind an in-game character to build up a meaningful connection. Discovery. Discovery or exploration can really take on many shapes or forms, from uncovering the entire map in a big RPG style game like a World of Warcraft, to collecting each and every Pokemon, or to learn new combos for a strategic game or for a fighting game. It's just exciting to explore a game and uncover all its secrets, right? So then there's expression. Expression refers to games in which we have the opportunity to be whoever we want to be and to live however we like. Again, a very powerful aesthetic, and it's clearly noticeable in the success of many simulation games and RPGs, like take The Sims for example, or even Second Life. It's all about expressing ourselves. And finally, there is submission. While the 7 previous kinds of fun have all been about actively engaging our hearts and minds through powerful emotional experiences, submission is a little less exhausting. Submission is about giving your time to a game in order to relax and engage in something mindless, just to drift away on the waves of the game. It's all about passing time, and clicker games are a really good example of it, but any game that is all about relaxation or just losing track of time fits the description. And there you have it, 8 kinds of fun that the authors of MDA outlined themselves. Now, as they also indicated, this is not really an exhaustive list. There is probably an endless amount of aesthetics, and speaking out of personal experience, my favorite place to find aesthetics is player motivation research. You see, aesthetics they're often the reason why people play games. Now, okay, if you're a crazy game designer like me who just reads rule books for fun and plays games for the sake of trying out weird mechanics, sure, you get a free pass here. But in general, aesthetics have strong ties to research on player motivation and player personality because there's just a lot of overlap. Now, my doctoral research was all about this topic, media psychology, communication science, and while academically speaking, there are a lot of differences between emotions, gratifications, player motives, personality types, and so on. Practically speaking, I see so much overlap between these things. So for the purpose of this class and video, and just for the practice of game design, we are now going to use some of these player motivational and personality models as MDA aesthetics. So anyways, let's start with 2 models for player types. First, there are Richard Bartle's 4 player types. They are actually derived from multi-user dungeons, which were early text-based MMORPGs, if you will, and they resonated so strongly with game designers that they are still being used. So these player types are achievers. So achievers are players that play the game to do well at it. It's similar to challenge, if you will. Then there are the explorers. Explorers are players who want to explore all the different possibilities that the game offers. So somewhat similar to discovery. Then there are the socializers. Socializers are players that are there to hang out with others and do fun stuff together. So a little similar to fellowship perhaps. But then finally there are, well, the killers. And yeah, well, I mean, I don't think we've really talked about these yet, but these are players that are in the game to impose themselves on others. Sometimes these are very competitive people, but it also relates to people who are just there to troll, really. So let's put them on here as very competitive players. And those are Richard Bartle's 4 player types. They are great, but these days there are also plenty of newer models, and a lot of them have better empirical support. For instance, I love the work from Jason Vandeberghe. Aside from designing AAA games, Jason also ties his vast industry experience to academia by translating the Big Five to game design. Now, the Big Five is something for a future video and further reading, but it is a psychological theory of human personality. So through this theory, our personalities are mapped on 5 dimensions. There's openness to new experiences, conscientiousness, which is the desire to do tasks well. There's extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And if you put the first letters of those together, you get ocean, which is a good way to memorize it. Now, these are all dimensions, so they are pretty much a spectrum. Being on one end of a dimension is not necessarily better or worse than being on the other end. And there are also many instruments to measure how somebody is positioned in relation to the Big Five with their personality. So I'll make sure to put a short but simple one of those in the further reading so that you can play around with it if you want. Now, translated to game design, Jason redefines these as motives for playing or types of games even. So openness becomes novelty, a dimension that distinguishes repeating conventional experiences from more open imaginative ones, which could be a subgroup of discovery, if you will, as a motive. Conscientiousness, that becomes challenge. So the extent to which a game allows you to put in a lot of effort or if it requires a lot of self-control to be completed. Then there's stimulation. So that's playing for simulating sensations, but also a little bit social engagement. Then there's harmony. Harmony is playing in relation to cutthroat competition or peaceful cooperation. So maybe a little bit of fellowship, maybe a little bit of submission, maybe some other things as well, but this is definitely already worth adding because it takes us in a different direction. And then finally, there's threat. So threat is derived from neuroticism, so it's about fear and anxiety on one end, while there's comfort and calm on the other end. Now, Jason Vandeberghe did some fascinating work here, and I found it to be extremely compatible with MDA for my own purposes. However, I also found that personality is not always the best way to explain gaming preferences in both my research as well as in some of the literature. Now, while personality types do have some explanatory value, I found that playing motives actually oftentimes have stronger correlations with gaming preference, and yes, there are definitely a lot of models of those as well. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to discuss two of those. So the first one is by John Sherry and his colleagues, who use the uses and gratifications approach to video games to develop a player motivation model. Now, uses and gratifications theory is a theory from communication science that explains how people develop motives to engage with various media, such as video games, based on their basic needs, social influences, and individual differences. Now, we don't need to dive any deeper into that for the purpose of this lecture, but using this theory, John Sherry and his colleagues found 6 playing motives. They are challenge, fantasy, social interaction, competition, diversion, and arousal. Now, I'm not defining all of them because they're similar to what we've already been talking about, so there is a lot of overlap here with the 8 kinds of fun. However, there is one strong difference between them, and that is that John Sherry and his colleagues' work is actually derived through empirical research, and that comes with an instrument as well. So if you pick these as your starting aesthetics, you could use the questionnaire as part of that instrument to evaluate if your game is actually meeting the aesthetics that you set out for it. So it's a wonderful hybrid between industry expertise and academic research. Now, speaking of that, as a final model, I'm going to bring up the work of Nick Yee, who can actually tell you all about the value of bridging the gap between academia and the industry. His work on player motives was originally academic, but it resulted in a spin-off company called Quantic Foundry, through which he advises game companies on how to improve their offerings through player motivation research. So through this rigorous research that gathered participants through viral social media strategies, he developed a motivational framework that looks a lot like this. There are 6 categories from action to creativity, and again we see some overlap with what we've talked about earlier, but what makes this model particularly interesting is how well it maps to video games. For instance, those 6 motives from Sherry and his colleagues that we discussed earlier could just as well work for a television show. Not so much here. Quantic Foundry's model includes items such as power, which maps very well to the power fantasies that so many games that are loved by younger audiences use. Or there's completion, like Pokemon, anyone? Anyways, it's time to wrap this up. So here's an inspirational slide that I put together myself that contains a number of aesthetics that I derived from theories and papers and books on player motivation and player personality over the years. It's by no means a finished exhaustive list, but there is a lot of inspiration in there. Anyways, my final point is that as game designers, you really want to be mindful of research on player motivation and player personality, as they can help you out with figuring out where you should start your MDA process. Maybe you could even get an idea of what the market for a specific aesthetic or a specific game would be like. For instance, let's say your game's demographic is going to be 35 to 54-year-old males. What kind of aesthetic would work really well there? Well, through player research, you can find answers. For instance, the Entertainment Software Association's annual report found that relaxation is a primary playing motive for that demographic. So now you have a starting point. Now you have an aesthetic that you can begin with, and there are many other studies that can help you flesh out some more aesthetics for this specific audience in a very informed manner. And if you ask me, with over 10,000 new titles, new games popping up on Steam every year, you probably don't want to go in blind when you're picking your aesthetics. Well, Reggie, that sure was a long video. We discussed a lot of things in that video, from MDA to player motivation, and if you'd like to learn more about the player motivation that Reggie really enjoys, you should check out my video on behaviorism. In any case, let us know how you felt about everything in the comment section, and if you need some inspiration for that, here are the slides with some topics that you might want to discuss. And that'll be it for this time. Bye-bye.